All right, on to the final part where the compiling and actual calculations are going to be done, and it will be finally finished. As you're aware, because we know about what that data is, but it's hyper-compressed, we need to then calculate it into the various constituents, break it out, which is 8 terabytes a second, of really compressed raw data. And so then we need to go, hey, this is what we need to filter it through for these calculations for it to mean this stuff. But we will see on our monitors. So we can still kind of fuck around with that by basically going like, it's this data. I'm going to write a malware program effectively. It's not a malware program. It's not really a malware program. But it's like, if I can break into your monitor and basically I know how it's going to calculate out of that. And then same thing with video, like VLCs and so on. It's like, I only need it to have this amount of information and it'll break it out and then display it to your screen quite quickly. So that's all I really need. But like, that's basically what the massive behemoth server is going to do. Because 8 terabytes a second is not chump change. 8 terabytes a second is not chump change. Okay? Even if I have 2 terabytes that are doing the 8 terabytes a second, because that's what the capacitor is for the analog style computers, and then it goes into all the rest of it. Like, that's raw computational performance that we just did with the programming and everything and changing all of it. And it's all just for extremely extraordinarily large resolution and frame rate. Trillions, tens of trillions. Like, that's what it's meant for, but for seconds to maybe some minutes. Like, my theory and hypothesis is the RAM will be destroyed within 10 minutes. Same thing for the CPU and even that fucking hard drive, because we are hitting it pound. It is going through very quickly. It's going to, even if we blow air and we have all the heat sinks and everything, it is hit 100%. Like, we have maxed it the hell out on all fronts, essentially, to make this a thing. There's no more bytes of information. Every bit is now, or series of bits, and then you get the bytes, because we're going to break it out, like I said, in the previous, and then the new previous videos. That's how we calculate it out to these servers. That's a big deal, okay? Now, what that means is, sorry, but it does work that way. By the way, you can run the CPU, you can run your motherboard, you can run all of the bridge, all of it like that. You can do all of that. Even hacking that stupid, I have a proprietary encrypted, blow it out your ass. I'm ripping it off and I'm putting my own shit in. I don't care what your shit is. I'm going to run mine. That's why that's a thing. But what that means is, like, I'm changing machine code. I am changing your binary and what it means. I am storing it as best I can in the cache system. And instead of looping it through, I'm just pushing it as it goes out. Like, there's no loops. It's just going to go in for that ingestion. And then the other one is like, no, I already know what it's going to need to be. That's going out now. I'm on logic. This is exactly, precisely, these are these frames, everything. I know all of what the data is going to mean. I know all of it. That's why it's analoging the data. And so, like, because it's stored and it's going to be this sequence and pattern and everything, I know because of the program it means this, and I just need to push it through that. So you have to know a lot about these different transistors and everything else, but you can do it. All of it's doable. Now, that goes into the CPU. That CPU is now going to compile it and break it out, compile it, calculate, because you already know how to program for those transistors and everything else. This is pure massive throughput. Remember, we're changing if we did it there, I'm doing it here again. And because I already know what it's going to be as it comes in, because I can change the stupid 8 terabyte a second fucking switch you got to have, and all of the rest of it that it's ingesting, and then it's going to all go to the individual areas that we're also going to calculate for the massive amount of fucking hard drive space that is going to be what this does and is used for. It is now known. And then it's like, because we had it for this is an open source kind of design for very, very, very high speed cameras that are analog like our eyes, that are going to see far more frequencies than everything else. This is what this is. This is analog until it gets all the way to here, which is finally digital. It's analog up until that fucking final calculation work. So that's going to go off to there, and then it's going to ingest it. And like, we're basically still just doing the whole, like, we're going to compile a little bit more because we have more time to do that. We're going to break it into the massive amount of hard drive, and then we're going to calculate the hell out of it to mean this is what that is actually for these given programs. This is a bespoke program that's turning the entirety of everything I just described into one huge calculator just for the one brain to eye connection that you set up and designed. Which means you have huge amounts of data that are being massively calculated for, that are extremely good at doing it. Extraordinarily good. Trillions of frames in a second. Tens is what I went with. Because 8 terabytes a second, even at bits, with all that, it tends to get like, oh yeah, no, this is like hundreds of no, it's like 10. It's not that much. It's only tens of trillions. Not that much. It's good, but it's not that good. You know what I mean? It's not hundreds of trillions. No, it's tens. It's tens. Don't worry. But what that was is like, that's the programming that your eye to your receptors, to your then line, to your then brain parts back here, which then break it out, send it to the frontal cortex, which then calculates, compiles all the rest of it. Then you interpret it with your given amygdalas and your all those stuff, the emotion or logic or what should I do next, and so on and so on, so on. And then you use quasi, like, if I would like to, then what's the things for my memory of or personality matrices, programming matrices, which is finally getting to the final part, because it's like, this is what that was supposed to be for. Remember that CPU? This is how we can calculate for your personality and you as a person. Take you as a neural network, given weighted system, desire, so on, and in your memory and whatever. But that's a hardware on analog. But it's a program that knows about it, and it's in your cache. Because it's set up like that. Your brain is physically set up like that. So it'll process the information like that, given the fuel intake, food, and medicine, respectively, that along with stressors and everything else, that pre-weight it before it goes into that hard drive hardware design. Analog circuitry. So what that means is you can absolutely be calculated for. You don't need to have all of the little fucking tiny little neurons. I just need to watch you for long enough, and I can pretty much make you like that. Now, because I have trillions of fucking, frames a second, tens of trillions, you know what I mean? Or 10, really. That means I can do the same thing for someone's personality. And if I filter the program to have this type of weight and everything else, that's you in the computer. I just need a big enough CPU. But now I don't. I have this wonderful CPU that can affect things from afar by calculating for the entanglement and then superposition and boop, and it knows. I can use that as a detector because of the resulted boom, and then it comes off, and then like the result of way it's going to know how to detect it. Which then means if you watch, and then you also are able to send it back by having another sent, tunneled, that is, that's going to be right there to detect it, and then you do it enough, then you can get to the point where it's detected by the CPU, or whatever detector you want, by a chain reaction that you're able to calculate pretty freaking accurately especially with this fucking kind of thing, and you do a series of them, and then you can use this analog kind of light-based style to effectively detect it and or calculate as the CPU that I just talked about for electricity silicon stuff. You can do the same thing right here, right now for light. Especially since now I have this wormhole little thing that's going to photonically release around this, puffed up orbital atom. Which then means I can now use that as my own version of memory and cache. And a transistor and all the rest of it. But it's not quite as good as that other one because it's not a superposition, you know what I mean? So you can't calculate as much. But you can calculate quite a bit around that sphere. But there's only so many, and, with the holographic, and you get the picture. Point is, I can now throughput massive bandwidth. And I can jiggle it the right way to entangle it for that resultive drop, which means is a detector, a memory, and a transistor, which can affect the way our world works around us. And we can then use that to determine people, very accurately determine them, measure them, and see their real thoughts, their real emotions, their real personalities. Now, what does that mean? That's the programming for people. That's the reason why the history works. That's why the CPU cooler is good. Here's the way the memory. Here's how to program the person. Here's and then here's how to change them by filtering it. Because it's okay, so if I have this calculate and I can filter it with this type of weighted, like if I have this drug or something else, then I have the ability to then affect that personality or even add in memories that weren't there previously. See how you can find them, which then you can then try and do your own and then basically have that managed. Now, we're going to get into why it is you can do that with your neurons, because effectively, you're already kind of doing that with your neurons. That's the quantum kind of part that they talk about that is happening, what I just talked about for that superposition that drops, that gives a charge. That's what you're already doing. In fact, that's pretty much everything I just described it as a CPU is how your brain works. To various degrees. Now, if you figured out how to do that and think about it correctly, now you have the ability to affect the world around you. But then now you have the ability to also detect if something's there that shouldn't be there. Same thing with the entirety of the universe. Now, that's how you can find out how I'm right and how it is, because I came up with this in the Chandler house my parents had back in the mid-2010s. So I'm like, oh, yeah, no. And then we got the ability to design and manufacture a lot of this stuff. In fact, we had that with higher, very expensive people that knew how to program, knew all that stuff for material manufacture and so on. But now it's it can be done at home. You could do most of this at home. In fact, all of it at home. And that is why it's oh, to me, you are idiots to believe in any way. You are not always being watched. You are not always being listened to. You are not always anything. And why that reality for me is a reality. I know about the history because eventually you can figure out that they are there, detect them, listen to them, and everything else. Even interact to various degrees. Then you can still use that quantum timeline thing where it's a time, frequency forward and backwards, and then that result of forward and then push back. If you tunnel it and entangle it and then calculate and all the rest of it, then you can get to other universes, you can get to other future, and then so on. So you get the picture. That's why it's real. That's why it's not fake. That's why you were wrong in assuming I was not logical and not reasonable. I am. You just didn't know why, because you're stupid.